that. Mr. Sheets, I wanted to give you an opportunity this morning to speak to some of what we're seeing. You mentioned it briefly in your opening statements. You didn't say that we're the incubator or the guinea pig for energy projects, but I like to think that we really are that testing ground for some very innovative energy technologies on the renewable side. We are pioneering what microgrids are all about. When you recognize that most of the communities in the state are not attached to any grid, and how you have to figure it out on your own, the resiliency that comes from being in a remote place and a high-cost energy state challenges us to be ever the more innovative. And I'd like you to speak specifically to our opportunities within geothermal. We've got great prospects out in Nome. What more can we be doing around the state to encourage that, but also to take this model and replicate it elsewhere? But also, given the fact that we've got policies back here that consider traditional geothermal to be this so-called mature technology, and as such, it's perhaps not eligible for certain federal assistance, if you will. We've got issues going on with our low temperature geothermal. We've got some R&D projects going on with low temperature that in other parts of the country they would have said it's not possible to even do what you're doing. Don't even start. And yet we know that in places like China, we've taken low temperature geothermal and we've powered a little resort. We have made it possible, but can we take what we have learned in Alaska and replicate that elsewhere?
Yes, Madam Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to that. Alaska is blessed with a lot of low-grade geothermal, meaning low-temperature geothermal. In other states that are blessed with a high-grade geothermal, they can build large power plants that feed into the grid system. In Alaska, we have very remote locations, and it's often hard to even characterize the geothermal resource that we have because in some of our areas that are permafrost, there are hot seeps, not necessarily hot springs in some of those places. So conventional ways of determining the geothermal potential involves going out there, having a flow test, if you will, for a spring that's identified or some flowing hot water. That doesn't exist in some parts of Alaska. It's very marshy, and the whole region is can be very warm, and pinpointing where the source of that hot water is very difficult in those circumstances. So we've had the opportunity to develop some technologies that allow us to fly over that area with forward-looking infrared cameras and kind of help define the basins, and then by measuring nearby lands, we can figure out how much heat it takes in that hot area to heat the ground temperature to that level. So these are some innovative ways of just kind of assessing these remote resources that we believe could work around the world in other situations that perhaps are underexplored for geothermal. Another area for us that's really key is, as the Senator pointed out, was making things smaller. We have a small population, we have small microgrids. We need to integrate these resources into the communities that we have. We can't do anything with 5 megawatts of power. That's like 10 times the size many of our communities need. We need small technology that enables us to convert those local resources into usable energy. And the technology for that doesn't exist. And the lower 48 could care less about it because they do have the grid system that they can rely on. And so in Nome, for example, we have done quite a bit of work to de-risk that resource. We've done quite a bit of work to see if it's economic to string 60 miles of transmission wire into Nome. Nome, if you'll recall, just a few years ago, ran out of diesel fuel, and we had to bring in the icebreakers to help them. They need local resources. You talk about energy security, that's energy security for Nome. What happened in our case is we got to the point where now the private sector has taken notice and is interested in possibly pursuing that further. And maybe we'll see an IPP come in and develop that resource and sell it to the community of Nome, thereby providing reliable energy year-round. But it's not just low-grade geothermal, too. We're doing that in small photovoltaics. Several years ago when Galena, if you recall, was flooded and nearly wiped out, there was quite a bit of emergency money coming to that community, and a lot of folks looked at it as an opportunity to put PV on every rooftop, if you will. You know, when we rebuild the communities, let's go ahead and do that. Well, the problems that you have with that is, again, if you put too much renewable into a small grid system, and a cloud comes over, suddenly you've destabilized that grid. So you still need conventional forms of energy to provide that base load or to follow. In our case, we're using diesel generators, small diesel generators. And as the senator pointed out, there are communities throughout the state of Alaska that have to make these microgrids work. At our center, we do a lot of research on integrating renewables with the conventional resources in microgrids. That is catching the attention of the nation because the nation is losing confidence in the reliability of its grid sources. And so you see military bases, you see hospitals, you see critical infrastructure going to the microgrid format, where they're installing diesel generators so that if they become islanded by choice or by happenstance, if they become isolated from the grid, they can make things work. Alaska has had to do that for pretty much its entire life as a state. And so that's why I didn't use words like incubator because we're doing things. Mm-hmm. We are leading it. Now what we want to do is export that knowledge to the rest of the states and to the rest of the world and invite them to see what we've done. We're not really looking for federal handouts. We're just looking, maybe for the feds to come alongside of us and help us figure out on those projects that weren't successful, but they were just really, really close. Sure be nice to see a little bit of investment to find out why we're that close and we just can't quite get there yet. Yeah. So that's where we try to focus our attention is what can we do to get that extra little step? And that's where I think a partnership like the demonstration projects that are listed in some of these bills are so important, and that's why I'm here today.
Well, I thank you for that, and I didn't want to cut you off from your answer because I think the information that you're providing is so important. Senator King and I are the co-chairs of the Arctic Caucus here in the Senate, and one of my hopes is that while the United States is chair of the Arctic Council for these next 2 years, one of the things that we lead on, that we help set the agenda on, is discussing and moving forward with some of the energy issues that particularly are lacking in the remote areas of the Arctic, in Canada, U.S. Arctic, and Russia. The European Arctic they've got, for the most part, they've got their energy infrastructure grids that are built out. Not so much in these big, vast open spaces, but how we can take some of these technologies, and as you say, this is not just R&D, this is on the ground, and sometimes it's a little bit of duct tape and just the crazy inventor out there, but when you
Sounds
don't
like
have,
something Maine and Alaska have in
Maine and Alaska
duct
would really get together well here on some of these because again, you've got challenges with your cold, you've got challenges with not having anybody else to rely on. And so this is something that again, when we talk about technologies and public-private partnerships, we have such an opportunity here.